We're continuing the book of Nehemiah, and then today we're going to finish it in chapters. We're going to do chapters 9 to 13 of Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah, and then we're going to do 9 to 13 today. Nehemiah 9 to 13. Now, as we know, a little bit of Jewish history here is the nation of Israel. Their first king was Saul, not a good king. And then David, really good king. And then Solomon was a good king. Multiple women, kind of changed the trajectory of Solomon. And then after that, there was a divided kingdom on Rehoboam, Jeroboam. And for 490 years, there was a lot of idolatry in the nation of Israel, and God continually sent his prophets to wake them up. And then what happened was that he said, for 70 years, if you do not repent, then you will be under captivity. And that's exactly what happened. God raised up the Babylonians and the Assyrian army, and the Assyrians wiped out the northern tribe. The Babylonians took the southern tribe. And we know that the southern tribe went to Babylon for 70 years. And this is where it's the book of Daniel, which we went through. And then after 70 years, this is Daniel chapter 5, under King Cyrus, he defeats Babylon, and God raised him up too. He's prophesied in Isaiah 44:45, and eventually brought back to Israel. And remember, there was three waves that went across. Hi, Jenny. The first was under Zerubbabel in 538 BC. The second one was with Ezra in 457, and the last was in 444 BC under Nehemiah. And that's what we talked about. We've been talking about the last 2 weeks. Okay, so last week we talked about Nehemiah 5 to 8, and chapter 5 ends with Ezra coming back on the scene. Remember, there was Ezra, he was by himself in chapter 7 to 10 of Ezra, and then he comes back in Nehemiah's time, because they lived around the same time, in chapter 8, and he reads the word. Remember that in chapter 8 where we finished off? If you look at your Bibles in chapter 8, how he reads, and he reads the Bible for 6 hours, okay? And then they celebrate the Feast of Booths, which again, is heartbreaking because we talked about this last week. And in the Jewish calendar, last week was the Feast of Booths, and you celebrate from Friday to Friday, and it transitions to a Shabbat, Saturday. And last week was the Feast of Booths, Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, and where these Hamas soldiers wiped them out on Sukkot. Okay? Yeah.
What was the Feast of Booths again? I forgot.
Feast of Booths, so there's 7 different feasts, and they're all derived in Leviticus, but they came from the Israelites as they went through the 40 years. So it's always a celebration of something. The Feast of Booths, or Feast of Tabernacle, is a remembrance of when you traveled for 40 years, you stayed in a tabernacle or a tent. So they would just get palm branches and they would put over little sticks, or that'd be their hut, right? Yeah. So if you had a tent, and that's where it's like tenting, okay? And Bonnie, you had that story. You had that story of right, the Jews, they stayed in a tent, right? But it's a remembrance. So again, we do communion, we do baptism. That's our for our a sense of remembrance. A Jew, they would have Yom Kippur, that's the Day of Atonement, and they also have the Feast of Booths. So as Israel practiced the Feast of Booths last week, the Friday to the Saturday is that transition, and again, it was just really sad what happened last week. Okay, so that's the religious context, if you wonder. So in war, it's a very cheap move. Again, I'm going off the Bible, but I'm just saying in war, when it comes to something, an act like that, it's a low blow, and the reason why it's a low blow is because it's one thing when a certain religious group celebrates on a holiday, and another group is aware of it and they attack. It's a cheap shot, right?
So it's like the Easter massacre in was that India, or like there was some Easter thing where like tons of people died.
Yeah,
and they were like, the Easter worshippers, and it was like a huge thing.
Yeah.
I forgot what happened.
So for example, if you're a Muslim, you know that Jews are going to be relaxed. They're not going to have, it's a time where you would want to attack. But the thing is this, it was a Friday night, which is the holy day if you're a Muslim, and they broke their holy day to slaughter and kill. That's religious context with it. So in around the 11th, 12th century, when the Crusades were happening, it was the Christians versus the Muslims, or it was the kingdom of Jerusalem at the time, and it was King Baldwin, who was a 16, 17-year-old king that had leprosy, and he had a mask because his face was all falling apart. So he had leprosy. He was a 16-year-old, and he was a young king, 16 years old. And they were fighting the Muslims. The Muslims wanted Jerusalem. Remember, it's 1,000 years, almost 1,000 years ago, and it was the same thing. They're fighting for the same land. And under Salahuddin, the Muslims, there was one part. It was a siege war, obviously. So there's the walls of Jerusalem, which we're going to talk about today, and the Muslims on a Friday, they're all bowing down doing the salat, right? They all pray to Mecca. And the Christians were like, should we fire catapults? Because they have no weapons. But they have honor. It's disrespectful to attack the Muslims under Salahuddin when on their holy time, right? So 1,000 years goes by and the Muslims did it to the Jews. So it's just real. I'm just bringing history. Has anyone seen The Kingdom of Heaven?
No.
It's part of it is in that film with Salahuddin and
really?
King Baldwin,
Wow.
the 16-year-old. He's a king. So leprosy, very famous king. Anyways, so that's what happened, and then that's chapter 8. So they celebrate the Feast of Booths, and then chapter 9 is what happens next. So remember, chapter 8, Nehemiah reads the word. Okay, he's a scribe, and then chapter 9 we're going to continue. Okay, so look at chapter 9. Now, chapter 9 is considered the longest prayer in the Bible. Okay? It's the longest prayer in the Bible. And today we're only going to read chapter 9 and 13. Okay? Because a lot of it is just names that we can't pronounce. So there's someone who's brave that wants to read fast or slightly embarrass themselves. We're going to avoid all that. Okay? So mainly chapter 9 and 13, but we're going to go through 10, 11, 12. Hi, Lane. All right, so we're Nehemiah chapter 9, guys. Nehemiah chapter 9. And can someone read verses 1 to 5?
I'll read it.
Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 1 to 5.
The people of Israel confessed their sin. Now on the 24th day of this month, the people of Israel were assembled with fasting and in sackcloth, and with earth on their heads. And the Israelites separated themselves from all foreigners and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. And they stood up in their place and read from the book of the law of the Lord their God for a quarter of the day. For another quarter of it they made confession and worshipped the Lord their God. On the stairs of the Levites stood Jeshua, Bani, Kadmiel, Shebaniah, Bani, Sherebiah,
You got it.
Shenani, and they cried with a loud voice to the Lord their God. Then the Levites, Jeshua, Kadmiel, Bani, Hashabniah, Sherebiah, Hodiah, Shebaniah, and Pethaniah said, "Stand up and bless the Lord your God from everlasting to everlasting. Bless your glorious name, which is exalted above all blessing and praise."
All right. So whoever wants to read chapter 11, 12, it's all those names, right? But here is look at verse 1 now. In the 24th day of this month, the people of Israel were assembling with fasting and sackcloth. Now remember, it says in the 24th day of this month. Remember, chapter 9 is a transition from 8. And in chapter 8, if you look at verses 2, where it says the first day, at the very end of verse 2, it's on the first day of the 7th month. See that? So it's the 7th month, and that's Tishri. So it's the 7th month in the Jewish calendar. That's pretty much July. July. So in chapter 8, it's July the 1st. And then in chapter 9, it's July the 24th. Right? It says the 24th day of this month. So just 24 days out. So from chapter 8 and chapter 9, there's 24 days that pass. So remember, he reads the law in chapter 8, and in chapter 9, 24 days go by, and now there is repenting. Okay, so what we have here is we have the same people after celebrating the Feast of Booths. They are now repenting. They are now mourning over their sin. There's sackcloth and ashes, which meant grief, which meant we're in distress, right? So here, and notice this, there is a combination. There's something beautiful when you see the word and when you see brokenness. Okay, when you see the word and when you see lamenting going on. Okay, both is what I'm saying. The reason why is because it's possible to have either or. Okay, meaning expressions towards God or just the Bible, and it doesn't look good when you have either or. It has to be both and. Okay, so you see in certain Christian traditions, say the Dutch Reformed, or the Baptists, they're very big on the Bible and books, right? Bible. You ever hear someone talk about the Bible, but their heart or their expression for God seems very cold? Has anyone seen that before? Yeah. Right? Or the reverse is where you see a lot of people that are very expressive towards God, and when they pray, it's like, whoa, it's really expressive and crying, but it doesn't seem really biblical. Has anyone seen that too? Right? A lot. And again, you in the Dutch Reformed or the Reformed Church or the Baptist Church, the Fundamentalist Church, a lot of Bible, a lot of books, right? Or if you go to the Pentecostal, the Charismatics, it's a lot of expressions, but I think both is a good balance, right? Both of them is a good balance. And here we have the Israelites having both. Ezra reads the scriptures, and the nation of Israel, they respond in grief and sorrow over their sins. Okay, so real brokenness leads to repentance, but there's always change that happens, and we're going to see the change happening shortly. Okay, now can someone read verses 6 to 15 this chapter? 6 to 15.
You alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all the starry host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to everything, and the multitudes of heaven worship you. You are the Lord God who chose Abram and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and named him Abraham. You found his heart faithful to you, and you made a covenant with him to give to his descendants the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and Girgasites. You have kept your promise because you are righteous. You saw the suffering of our ancestors in Egypt. You heard their cry at the Red Sea. You sent signs and wonders against Pharaohs, against all his officials and all the people of his land, for you knew how arrogantly the Egyptians treated them. You made a name for yourself, which remains to this day. You divided the sea before them so that they passed through it on dry land, but you hurled their pursuers into the depths, like a stone into mighty waters. By the day you led them with a pillar of cloud, by night with a pillar of fire, to give them light on the way they were to take. You came down on Mount Sinai. You spoke to them from heaven. You gave them regulations and laws that are just and right, and decrees and commands that are good. You made known to them your holy Sabbath, and gave them commands, decrees, and laws through your servant Moses. In their hunger you gave them bread from heaven, and in their thirst you brought them water from the rock. You told them to go in and take possessions of the land. You had to take possessions of the land you had sworn with uplifted hand to give them.
So, we have a prayer here, or a confession here of the people, and notice what they do. They, verse 7 and 8, You are the Lord, the God that you chose Abraham and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and gave the name Abraham. You found his heart faithful before you and made with him the covenant to give his offspring the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Ammonites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and the Girgashite. And you have kept your promise, for you are righteous. So here we have the people reiterating the covenant of Abraham. Okay, in verse 7 and 8, and verse 9 to 15, they also go back to Moses and the history of the Exodus. Okay, so again, you're going to see something very familiar with the Jews in the scriptures, and that's they always, when it comes to a prayer, when it comes to a confession, they always go back to their history, right? They always go back and they kind of trace it. In Psalm 78, it's a long psalm, but it's all about the history of the Israelites. And in the midst of the history that they're communicating, they're always reiterating the faithfulness that God has towards his covenant. Verse 7 and 8, he brings up the covenant of Abraham. And then when he talks about Moses, from verse 9 to 15, it's as if that God forgot, right? They're in the wilderness for 40 years, right? It's always, but again, God is always faithful to his covenant. And another thing is history. The Jews will always use history as a means to communicate the grace of God and gratitude. It's always a means to be grateful. Whenever you go back into the Jewish history, they're always talking about, but God was merciful, God was gracious to the nation, even though they should not, even though if he let go of them, he would have been completely just to do so, but he did not. So it's a reiteration of his grace when we look at history. Okay, again in Acts chapter 7 we have Stephen. Remember, he's about to be persecuted, and he just from the top of his head just communicates Jewish history. But the same thing, he's always reiterating the covenant of God, the grace of God, the mercy of God towards the people, and as a result, there should be gratitude. Should be, okay? There should be. You can say the same thing with us, where sometimes one of the beautiful things about history is you could see the hand of God, and as a result, be grateful as a society. And the same thing individually. If you look back at your life, we are like, wow, God was good to me, right? Well, sometimes when you look back, like let's just say you're in a moment today, or you're in a moment a couple of days ago where you just felt so discouraged. And sometimes you question the absence of God because it feels like that, right? It feels like God is very absent sometimes. But when you look back at your life and you kind of see, man, no, the times where God felt he was the most distant was that he was actually working something in me, right? And the same thing with the nation of Israel, where it's a time where, whenever it's times where it felt like as if God was not involved, God was always doing something, right? 70 years of captivity, right? God was doing something. 40 years in the wilderness, God was doing something. And I'm sure the same thing goes with the nation of Israel today, and the same thing with our lives as people of God. Okay? Any questions?
I mean, I think it's like overall, it's just to me as I look at it, it's just a reiteration, a synopsis of what God did from the beginning of the books. Someone's here.
Hey!
Sorry, I'm late.
You're good. Got your chair.
Is anyone sitting here?
No, that's you. That's for you.
So basically, like,
Hey, we're Kevin.
Yeah. What's up?
I like your hat.
Thanks.
But it's just, moreover, it's just basically like a synopsis of like what God did through Abram, and then when he like called him out of his people, called him out of Ur or whatever, and then gave him Abraham's name, and then gave him the promise and like his descendants like the stars, and then giving all the pagan land to his people. So it's just basically a synopsis of what God did in all the other books previous.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like it's basically like a Cliff Notes version of like, this is what God did for us in case you didn't remember the previous books.
Yes. And that's a beautiful thing about history. Okay, remember, the Jews don't have Bibles like we do. Like everyone has a Bible, you can go on your phone, you can, but it's a lot of memorization. And they can't quote, maybe like Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema, they can quote, but like, I'm sure they can't like quote like John 3:16, like the way we do it, because again, there's no numbers or whatever it is. But when it comes to history, they have it down. They have it down, and you see it through Stephen. You see it through Psalm 78. You see it through this prayer right here, or this reaction.
Ruben, can I add just that
Sure.
real quick?
Sure.
I've been meeting with some Orthodox Jew friends, and I've been learning kind of with them and going to synagogue, and you'd be shocked. They don't know the Torah. I mean, the rabbis, I'm sure, do, but for the most part, the Orthodox Jews don't know even our Old Testament. Because they study, they have commentaries called like the Mishnah, which is like the Talmud. They have other things that they pretty much spend all their time studying, and not so much. So I was surprised. I was shocked.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even really know the Old Testament as much as we do, and they don't know the New Testament at all. And a lot of them actually don't even know that Jesus was Jewish. They think he was some sort of a Catholic person that like ordered their execution. There's a lot of like misunderstanding.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That they just, and I'm learning all this, and it's blowing my mind.
Yeah, they're not even allowed to like dig into Jesus. It's Mormons, Muslims. Yeah, they're not. Like it's. Yeah, they don't I'm all for free thinking. Like I encourage you guys, read. Like understand, come with it, because at the end of the day, it's your own conviction, right? And it's I don't know. I don't want to get into it, but like it's kind of like I don't want people to be ignorant, if that makes sense, right? So I think if you can know, like I'll try to talk about Islam, as much as possible to relate it. But again, other like they won't do that. They won't do that. No.
Plus, I think it's important even for Nate to mention that, because I think a lot of times as a believer, you may understand what you believe, but you don't understand what other people believe, and then you're kind of narrow in your scope of thought. That you don't understand what the enemy's doing, and I'm not saying anyone else is the enemy. I'm just saying if you don't understand like what other people are doing, then you don't understand the total playbook. Like you're limited in your thoughts. Like that's why I appreciate like when you talk, because it's like you're able to talk about Islam in an intelligent way, and all that. Because it's like, well, if we don't know about it, then it's like, oh no, Islam, oh I'm scared.
Right.
So it's just good to talk about it.
It's so interesting, because as soon as a lot of them didn't know he's Jewish. So as soon as they find out that he's Jewish, and then I say, he kind of, the story that is in our New Testament reminds me a lot of the story of Joseph, how he was rejected by his brother, and then in the end they realized he was basically their salvation. And as soon as you start putting a few of those things together, they are all ears, and they're asking me questions. And it's so, because we typically, I've always thought of the Jewish people as sort of like the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees that Jesus encountered, and then I think that all of them, like as I would see them walking down the street, or I'd be like, oh man, they reject Jesus, but in actuality, they really don't know. The ones today don't know much, never really even heard of him, which is really interesting. And I think that field is really ripe for the harvest. Like Jesus talks about this field of, I think there's going to be a big thing where a lot of Jewish people are going to find out that Jesus was Jewish, that Jesus was their brother, that there were some mistakes that happened, and I think they're going to fall in love with him. And I think it's all going to happen. I think it's going to happen, in our lifetimes.
You know what? When it comes to Judaism, it is a religion, but on a pragmatic level, it's more of a culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the way you dress, the way you sit,
Sort of a whole way of life.
Yeah, it's a way of life.
Even more so than a lot of them they love God so much. But it is like a way, and you're born into it, and a lot of times that's all you know. And then they're not told about Jesus really at all. They think he was like a guy, that, maybe like David Koresh,
right?
Or like a cult leader or something, just in history,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's continue. Nehemiah 9. Can someone read 16 to 31? Nehemiah 9, 16 to 31.
Yeah, I'll read it. 16 is, but they and our fathers acted proudly, hardened their necks, and did not heed your commandments. They refused to obey, and they were not mindful of your wonders that you did among them. But they hardened their necks, and in their rebellion they appointed a leader to return to their bondage. But you are God, ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abundant in kindness, and did not forsake them. Even when they made a molten calf for themselves, and said, "This is your God that brought you out of Egypt," and worked great provocations, yet in your manifold mercies you did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of the cloud did not depart from them by day to lead them on the road, nor the pillar of fire by night to show them light, and the way they should go. You also gave your good spirit to instruct them, and did not withhold your manna from their mouth. Quick question: is that the same thing as the Holy Spirit when he said you gave your good spirit to instruct them?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And did not withhold your manna from their mouth, and gave them water for their thirst. 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness. They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. Moreover, you gave them kingdoms and nations, and divided them into districts. So they took possession of the land of Shihon, the land of the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, king of Bashan. You also multiplied their children as stars of heaven, and brought them into the land which you had told their fathers to go in and possess. So the people went in and possessed the land. You subdued them before them, the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, and gave them into their hands with their kings and the people of the land, that they might do with them as they wished. And they took strong cities and rich land, and possessed houses full of all goods, cisterns already dug, vineyards, olive groves, and fruit trees in abundance. So they ate and were filled and grew fat, and delighted themselves in your great goodness. Nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against you, cast your law behind their backs, and killed your prophets who testified against them, to turn them to yourself. And they worked great provocations. Therefore you delivered them into the hand of their enemies who oppressed them. And in the time of their trouble, when they cried to you, you heard from heaven, and according to your abundant mercies you gave them deliverers who saved them from the hand of their enemies. But after they had rest, they again did evil before you. Therefore you left them in the hand of their enemies, so that they had dominion over them. Yet when they returned and cried out to you, you heard from heaven, and many times you delivered them according to your mercies, and testified against them that you might bring them back to your law. Yet they acted proudly and did not heed your commandments, but sinned against your judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. And they shrugged their shoulders, stiffened their necks, and would not hear. Yet for many years you had patience with them, and testified against them by your spirit and your prophets. Yet they would not listen. Therefore you gave them into the hand of the peoples of the lands. Nevertheless, in your great mercy you did not utterly consume them, nor forsake them, for you are God, gracious and merciful. To 31, is it?
31. So, but by the way, the concept of the Spirit of God is not a New Testament concept. Like, we know the Spirit of God is in the Old Testament. It's just the Spirit of God being God is a New Testament concept. Yeah, like, if you didn't know that, like, just we believe in the Holy Spirit, but Genesis 1, the Spirit hovered over, right? So the Spirit is
He's
definitely,
and it's been in people. He's
yeah,
given them,
like, it's just the Spirit being God is different. That's more of a New Testament understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So notice this though, from verse 16, 17 onward, is that there's a repetition of humanity here. So when we talked about verse 16 to 15, it was the history of God's faithfulness to Israel and His covenant, and then 17 we're going to hear now man's response, and there's something that repeats, right? Verse 17, but verse 16. But they and our fathers acted presumptuously, but stiffened their necks, right? Stiffened their necks.
Was that a reference of, like, why did they say it like that?
So, so in essence, when the term "you're stiff-necked," okay, was a Jewish lingo. Like it's. I was thinking about like, in every generation, there's always like new words that are developed, like clout. Like 5 years ago, there was no clout.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, that's what's
Bling.
what's that?
Bling.
Bling. It means you're showing off your jewelry, money. It's a new, but like that God used like a contemporary like title, like stiff necked, to them. So it's like,
It's kind of funny. Is
yeah.
it the same as hard-headed? Or
stubborn.
would it be the same as like Pharaoh's hardened heart, kind of? Or is
Yeah.
it- or is it a
Kind
little
of.
different?
That might be different theologically, but
yeah.
but it originally started when in Exodus 32-33, when the nation of Israel, like, they clearly saw the miracles of God, the Red Sea, all the miracles, right? The plagues. Like, God intentionally did that, so it was like, I'm going to show you my fireworks. How about that? You're going to be witnesses to my fireworks. Some miracle that you cannot forget. And they saw it. They were there. But in the midst of seeing the hand of God, it's like Moses goes up into the mountain. It's like, let's get our jewelry together. Let's form a golden calf, right? And then when Moses comes down, we're gonna be like, oh, it just popped out of the fire. Like, like that is like, that's not intelligence. That's not a lack of reason. That's a heart issue. That's a heart issue, and that's why there's this debate today in theology and Christian apologetics as far as, do you really need to win someone's mind to God, or do you really need to win their heart, and then their mind will naturally change? And it's true. When you win someone's heart to God, their mind naturally changes, right? When your heart is hard towards someone and you're angry, your brain will just naturally think of how to get back, negativity of them. I can't stand this part about them, right? You'll focus on like an imperfection about them, right? If they have a mannerism, you in your mind, we naturally do these things when our heart is hard.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have a soft heart, and your mind just stops thinking like that. You think more loving, and right?
Yeah.
It's and that's why Jesus was saying, like, yeah, you can have miracles all you want, but you're still not going to believe because your heart is hard. So when it comes to, say, for example, atheists, it's like, if God were to have, like, in the sky, I exist, right? Or like, if you're in a room and like make that water bottle fall down, right? Will you believe in God? The answer is no. You still won't believe in God, right? Because you're assuming that it's mental. It's all cognitive. But in reality, it's your heart. Because you could see that, and if your heart's not changed, you're not going to believe. And we're talking about the people of God did that. Like this is how in the world, like, how do you see that? And all of a sudden you take your jewelry, your gold, and like you make a calf. And you know what that showed, right? The idolatry of Egypt still persisted in their heart. And they just had the opportunity, and it played out, right? So.
Yeah, I think they wanted to like improve. Like I feel like there's like a thing where it's like you can have something that really like a good thing, but then you try to do something to like make it even better.
Right.
It's like it's like you have a fast car, but then like let's put a downpipe on it to make it go even faster. So I feel like the Jews were just like, well, we have God, so let's make it even better. Or I don't know.
It was like a syncretistic mindset. I always bring that word up. Syncretism just means, the coexist sign you see in the back of a car, and it means like Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity. All of it could be true at one time. Like a lot of the Jews still believed in that, right? Because they came out of Egypt. So, anyways, that's where the word came about. It was in I think it's Exodus 32. It was God called. Yeah, God was the one that used their terminology and be like, "You are stiff-necked," right? So it's like God using the word
like probably from like if you try to like grab somebody or something and they like they freeze up. I wonder, or if you like pick up a dog and they like don't want it.
Yeah.
Like I wonder if it comes from that.
So
maybe from being proud. You know how when you're proud, you'll put your neck up and you'll walk through the crowd like you own the place.
Mm-hmm.
So okay. The word, the way the Jews came about with the word was stiff-neck was, there was an ox, okay, and there was something called an ox goad. And an ox goad was this, it was kind of a whip, but for oxes, and it was this pole, but then there was like a a prick at the end of it. It went like this, and then they would boop. They would in the book of Judges. There's a guy by the name of Shamgar, and he killed 600 men with this tool, the ox goad. 600 men, very bloody, right? Sorry, but it's there in the book of Judges. But you prick the ox, and the ox would turn, okay? But whenever someone had the ox go and they pricked the ox and it didn't turn, it meant their neck was stiff, and it was very dangerous because say you were going forward and you had to make a sharp turn. Say there was a cliff. Say there was a tree. Say there was a rock. And the ox kept going, and you're trying to make a turn. You're like, no, it's kind of like you're driving a car and you can't turn it, and it'd be very dangerous. But the point was that the ox could not turn because it was stiff-necked, right? So it comes
Makes
to
a lot of sense.
yeah. So when it comes to the people of God or people, stiff-necked is pretty much a terminology, but you are utterly stubborn. You can't change in your ways. And sociologically, the older a person gets, the more stubborn, stiff-necked they become. It's true. Like when you're young, you can mold someone a lot easier. But
I know there's some young people like that too.
right. It's all of us. It's all of us. But sociologically, they say the older someone gets, I think like when you hit 40,
That's true.
like that's it. Like typically, like there's always hope and transformation, obviously. But look at so what we have then verse 16, you stiff necked, right? And then he says in verse 17, but they stiffened their neck and appointed a leader to return to their slavery of Egypt. Okay, so they pretty much brought it back. Let's turn to 4 minutes. We got 4 minutes.
Who did they appoint to? Who's he referencing?
Saul.
Okay.
Saul.
Oh yeah. Okay,
Yeah. Remember, God was like, don't, because they wanted a monarchy.
Yeah.
They wanted to be like the other nations, and God was like, I'm your king. I'm your king. And they're like, no, we want a king, like a real king. Like, all right.
It's funny. How come you think God let? Because I remember Samuel was grieved about that, but then God said no. Like God seemed to like be okay. I mean, obviously he wasn't happy about it, but then he seemed to like switch. Obviously, it's to play the whole story out, I'm sure. But Samuel was really grieved, wasn't he, when they wanted a king?
Oh yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was. Yeah. So I thought you said Solomon. I was like, wait.
Oh yeah, Samuel.
No, Samuel. Yeah. Samuel was. Yeah, he was. Yeah. So again, that was the original intent of God. Remember, God gives people autonomy. God gives people freedom. Okay, remember that. He always allows people. He's like, you want to go that way? Go that way, but don't blame me when you fall down. And that's humanity in a nutshell, right? Right? We fall down. God's like, are you sure you want to go that way? I was like, all right, go your way, and then we fall down.
Yeah.
Right, and then we go back to God. That's just humanity till today, thousands of years later. Verse 28. But they what? But after they had rest, they did evil again before you. Because repetition. And here it is in verse 29. Look at the end of it, where it says, and they turned what? A stubborn shoulder and stiffened their neck and would not obey. Okay? So again, stubborn shoulder. Think of classic illustration is Jacob. He's one of my favorite biblical characters, but Jacob was just born holding. He's always grabbing on. Like literally, he came out of the womb holding his brother's heel, his foot, right? But just holding on to the blessing, holding on to. Remember, like where he tricked his brother into he came in with he was making stew. His brother comes in from hunting, right? He tricks him. His dad.
Tricks the dad.
Yeah, tricks the dad. He's like, here, take. His dad's all partially blind, and he comes right. And he's like, yeah, I'm Esau, right? But he tricked his dad. Worked 14 years, right, for his wife Rachel, and then he's always holding on. If you notice that, and then the last time you hear of Jacob, and there's a transition to his name Israel, is that he's now wrestling God, and he's holding on to him. Right? You see that? Mm-hmm. And that was the one being that he was supposed to hold on to. Mm-hmm. Every single time in life, he's always holding on to something of his own, and then the one being he was supposed to hold on to, he finally had him. And God's like, all right, you're finally learning. Bam! Right? And then he's now Israel. You finally learned. So I'm just saying, like, again, most people are stubborn. We're all stubborn in our own little ways. Yeah. But my point was with Jacob is that there's always redemption. There's always hope of changing. And sometimes, sadly, it takes grief. It takes hitting rock bottom. It takes failure for someone to be freed from that. right? So again, but notice the repetition of humanity. You stiff-necked people. Okay, well, we can say the exact same thing with our generation, right? As far as a lot of stiff-necked, stubborn people. We're born proud people, babies to adults.
Do you think some of the things that we've seen in modern times, and I mean even right now, is still a continuation of this pattern, or is it hard? Probably, right?
So, all right, guys, we're gonna get offline, and we'll come right back on. Okay.
Do you want water? There's a water right there.
Nate,
Right here.
Thanks.
and we have hamburgers if you want.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
up there. If you want
Man,
to.
you guys have a party, everybody. I didn't know that.
Yeah, we have pecan pie if you want. Go ahead.
Oh,
All right, thank you. This is went to Israel together, or he's my friend from LA, and we happen to be 5 minutes from each other. Right? I told you guys, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I need Skechers. I might have one pair of shoes.
I went to
but I don't
Birmingham
Skechers.
today.
Oh, did you? Yeah, I went to.
I got my 1 year certificate.
1 year?
Well, annual.
Speaking of, I was telling them about that experience we had when we were at the hotel, your hotel,
Yeah.
and I was just telling them like the context as far as like how divided it is. Like, my hotel was 5 minutes away from yours,
Mm-hmm.
and it was King David, like that area, Jewish, and then
Mhm.
yours was five minutes, like their taxi driver, like 5 minutes away, and it was an Arab territory, and like we were looking for an Israeli flag to take a photo. There was none.
Yeah.
Hotel, we're like, and they're like, no, it's Palestine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's how divided like the
Do you
context.
think right where we were, do you think when everything was breaking out, was there violence right there, or was it not in the old city? at all?
Probably, yeah.
It probably was.
Around there, yeah. It was. This thing was planned to the T. Oh yeah, yeah. This was planned. Is everyone okay? Hot, cold? Open the window? No.
It's a little hot.
It's a little, should we open the window? Yeah. I'll open the window.
I'll just back it.
No. It's
We just put a book.
yeah. It's
You have to put a book in
yeah.
there.
It's a little.
Oh,
Here.
there's tricks in it.
Yeah. Okay. Better.
Yeah, that's good. It's good for me. I don't know. Kevin's sitting with me. So. Oh, he likes it.
Use the restroom.
We all have jackets. He likes the window opening. Tends to make you sleepy when it's hot.
Snoring.
It's-
he would? No. Oh, if she goes, she's like, she tends to sleep if it's hot.
Did you?
It's a nice colorful Bible, I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They,
It's good, but it's also
you know how everybody
distracting
gets on their
sometimes.
animal.
Yeah.
I mean, and it tells you down here
What's it
what
called?
why the colors are for and everything, but it's,
It
That's
can be,
okay.
I can see how it can be distracting.
yeah, I just try
I
to,
wanted a pair of
it's
those,
big
so I'll get
print.
one of them.
Yeah. That's nice.
I'm looking at yours and Kevin's.
Yeah.
I could not read, even with my glasses, I
This
was
one's
like,
so
I could read.
tiny.
And
Yeah.
so is his.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is as tiny
Yeah,
as,
that's why.
and I can't read it, I would unfortunately are one of yours.
Tell you anything
Even
about
with glasses, I don't think I can read it, but
No, they did.
I just, actually, I got a pair too today, I got like new boat shoes, the slip-ons,
Right.
the navy, navy. I got those today.
oh, I didn't see that, those are
Oh, they
cute,
did?
the little swirls.
Oh, the S for Skechers.
Yeah, looks like roads.
Yeah, it does.
I kinda like that material.
We're leaving for Portugal in a couple of days, so I wanted to break these in and make sure they don't hurt, cause
And I have
they
some
get lock
friends,
walking.
my neighbor that used to live, her daughter and son-in-law live in Portugal and they're coming in tomorrow from
Oh,
Portugal.
wow.
Really?
For just a week. Yeah, they're, he's from Brazil, and so they all speak Portuguese
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
everything,
cool.
and so they really like it there. I think they're gonna end up staying there.
In Portugal?
Yeah. There's a lot of people moving there. Yeah, She,
Yes.
her dad was Portuguese, so she spoke it and went to Brazil to teach English. And then he's Portuguese, and they met, and then they ended up getting married. But she wanted to go to school, and she could go cheaper and get her master's in Portugal.
A lot cheaper there than here.
Yeah.
Where do we leave off?
31.
No,
Well,
we were talking about like contemporary issues.
Oh, I
We're talking about
asked.
stiff neck.
Yeah, I asked if the things that we're seeing today, potentially like the Holocaust, is. I mean, it's so awful. It's hard to. But is it
All right.
this sort of stuff?
So, I wouldn't say this in a crowd of like 100 plus people or 200 people, but I think it's consistent. I think of what I'm saying, and you can disagree. That's fine. You can disagree, but like, if you look at certain nations currently, say America and Israel, they're not doing well. We're not doing, and when I'm saying not doing well, I don't mean politically. I mean spiritually and ethically. Spiritually first, and number two, ethically. We're going to talk about that later. Spiritually first, number two, ethically. So, if you think Israel is this religious nation, which it is, it's also heavily secular, like America. So what's happening here is happening there. You can take every
Tel Aviv
issue.
felt just like America.
So, Tel Aviv. So they've made two major cities. There's Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It's only like 45 minutes apart. So like all of Israel is the size of New Jersey. Okay, but Tel Aviv is like, first of all, it's second to Silicon Valley. Like if you think of like technology advancement, Silicon Valley is number one in the world. Number two, it's in Tel Aviv. So they're very advanced. So that's why it's surprising that Hamas would sneak through and do all this. But it's not that. It's how secular they have become. Meaning that there are people that are just flat out atheists. They make fun of Jews, like their religion, Christians, Muslims. They think it's all silly. They're heavily progressive, heavily liberal. So the people get shocked when I say this, but the biggest gay pride march in the world is in Tel Aviv.
really?
It's bigger than the one in Long Beach?
In the world.
Oh.
No, could
Is in Israel.
Maybe God is trying to wake them up.
So my point, if you see the 1,000 people that died, 200 of them were at that IDM carnival, which is like a rave. I'm just being honest.
Yeah,
Most
I was
like
wondering that too because it was a very like.
yeah, like
wild crowd.
most likely they're not conservative religious people. They're very progressive. They're very liberal. They're very pro-gay. They're very pro-abortion, etc. Like I'm just saying, like, and I could see like whenever something like that happens, God always wakes them up through what? Terror, rising up, another nation, horror, right? Babylon,
Hands
Syria.
over to the enemies.
Yeah, the enemies. He'll rise them up to wake up Israel. So, again, I'm putting two and two together. Like I think God is trying to wake up the Western world, because like you look at the Western world where people are denying God. They're making fun of Christians. They're showing the gay flag right in front of our face. Right? It's just left and right. Like we're becoming so anti-God. America, the UK, Canada, like all the Western nations, Israel. That I think God is like, all right,
They're sexualizing children.
sexualizing children, you name it. So I'm just saying, like, again, I wouldn't say this. I wouldn't say, this was
it's a hard thing.
this was God's judgment upon Israel to wake everyone up. But again, you put two and two together. Where, like, again, Israel is not at a good state, and like, me and a friend have been talking about this for the last year. As far as like every single time, it's like the decrease of Israel. Like we saw this coming. So I wasn't surprised at all that this happened. So, but we were there when Benjamin Netanyahu got elected.
Yeah.
In October last year,
Mm-hmm.
and there were young kids in Tel Aviv that were discouraging Benjamin Netanyahu, who's pretty much the equivalent of Donald Trump here in America. The same thing. Oh, Benjamin Bibi, they call him Bibi. He's racist. This, and guess who he's racist towards? The Palestinians, right? Those in Gaza. Look what happened. So again, to those kids, and these are 17-year-olds, just like you see on the streets here, who have, with all due respect, have no clue what they're talking about, and most likely they're not God followers, and they don't show any reverence to Christ. So when terror strikes, I always say this: when real terror strikes, those who are loud become silent. Where are those people in 2020 that were all in the streets marching against injustice and etc. Where are they? There was clear injustice that happened a week ago, and that's continuing to happen today. Where are they? You see? So again, you just put two and two together. Again, I didn't plan to say this, but
Sorry, I'm asking
no,
tough
but
questions.
but it's very biblical, isn't it? It's very biblical. Whenever
It might be our turn next.
I've said that repeatedly. America will be next if it doesn't wake up. Meaning, look at the southern border. BLM already announced that it's in support of Hamas. We see a lot of BLM kids in every blue city terrorizing, like looting, it's unbelievable. And I'm just saying, like, if something happens, guess what? Those kids that are all loud and noisy, screaming Black Lives Matter and justice and all that, they're all going to be silent. That's just what's going to happen. I'm not a prophet, but just common sense.
Do we have any concern about tomorrow? The threats with tomorrow?
I would definitely. If the thing is this, terrorism wants that. That's the essence of terrorism. They want you to be scared, right? But there's also a balance of common sense and wisdom and discernment. And I think, based upon the state where we're at, as for America, it's weak. We're very weak. Israel was very weak, right? So it's a good it's a good opportunity for terrorism to strike the U.S. Again, I never planned on this. By the way, I'm supposed to be going verse by verse through this, but again, it's kind of relevant, right? So I'm speaking practically here. If there were to be a terrorist attack in America, it would be before the next president, because most likely it's going to be a Republican or conservative, and it's not going to go well with them. So I'm just saying, based upon the current presidency, it's a good opportunity, because usually when you have someone like that in office, they're very weak and evil takes over. Yeah.
But I think that in culture, like, I think there's a mistranslation of, like, you know, Israel, and there's like this Zionist movement where it's like people think that, I don't know, it's just it's so weird. Like, people love, like, Israel, which is fine. Like, you can love the country, but I think the problem is like it's not, a lot of it's not the same as like it was in the biblical text we're reading. Just as like America is not the same as like when the Quakers came, you know, and the values were different, and it's like, oh, a Christian nation and all this stuff. Like, it's like all the progress and like and everything that happened in the generations that preceded us, like we have a nice life here now because of all the sacrifice, and the same thing for Israel. But people are that luxury is leading people to idolatry, whether it be, you know, sexual idolatry, or like, you know, race idolatry, or, you know, drug idolatry, whatever it is. And people are just kind of going into that, and then it's like, but people, I feel like people still think of like America or Israel as these like Christian places or something, but it's different now.
I can go on a tangent on that thought, Kevin.
Are there any really strong nations on the planet right now that are like adhering to the way, or is potentially America our best example?
I think Nigeria is like...
Nigeria's on fire.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a nation that's probably not in the West right now because of how bad liberalism has taken, like wokeism has taken over the Western world. I was going to say Armenia is the only like legitimate like Christian nation, like they're declaring Christian nation.
Is Korea having like a...
South Korea maybe, like but... Oh, sorry, we just shut off. Oh, this happened last week where it logged off and it logged on. Okay, really quick, guys. If you are a Christian, so there's always a connection between Christianity, the Republican Party, and Israel. I don't know if you noticed that. Has anyone noticed that?
Yeah.
So the reason why is because those who are Christian, and it really stems from your eschatology, okay? Meaning that your view of the end times, the book of Revelation, Daniel, is that you believe that the nation of Israel has a place in eschatology. Okay, so as a result, we need to protect America needs to protect. If you're conservative, you're typically pro-Israel, and if did I disappear, guys?
Yes, you did.
Okay, I think it's the Wi-Fi. Sorry.
Probably.
So, but it's more. It's a when someone is in support of Israel, it's usually connected to their eschatology, meaning that we need to protect Israel because Christ is going to usher in the new kingdom, etc. The millennium will be there, so we need to protect it, and America needs to protect it. So it's a religious argument. Okay, so that's why if you wonder why so many Republicans are so pro-Israel, it's because of that. Okay, so anyways, last thing, stiff-necked. Psalm 23. We're talking about. Let's go back to Psalm 23, and we're still in chapter 9. We got to go through 13. It's almost 7:20, almost. But your rod and thy staff, they comfort me. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, because what your rod and thy staff, they comfort me. A shepherd had the staff. It's kind of like that shepherd staff. We all know the shepherd staff. And there's the rod, this part right here, and it always direct the sheep, right? So if you have 100 sheep, there's always that one sheep that's stubborn, right? Always goes around, and the shepherd would just gently take the rod and bring it back into the fold. But then there was that other sheep that was always stubborn, right? It was always going out, even with the rod. So the shepherd had to turn around, and there's the bottom part, and that's the staff. And they whack it, and they break its leg typically to the point they have to carry on top of it, carry it. And that's what God does to us. The rod and thy staff. The rod he uses to direct us, right? But to the stubborn, the stiff-necked person, he has to flip it over, and he takes the staff, and he will make us go rock bottom. He will not give us what we want. He will make us fail at something. He'll give us a disease, something. I don't know. To wake us up and to not be stubborn. Okay, just like the sheep. And that sheep that typically had a broken leg that limped often walked back into the line. See, I don't want to experience that again, right? And I think God does that to us. Okay, just like Jacob. Ironically, that Jacob walked away with what? A limp. So, right? The imagery. The sheep walked away with a limp. Jacob walked away with a limp. Okay, so now that's chapter 9. Now look at the end of chapter 9, the very last verse. Okay. Because of all this, we make a firm covenant in writing. So now they're making a covenant. Okay, after they're praising. So chapter 8, they read the scripture. Chapter 9, there's some sense of a revival of repentance. And then here, the very last verse, we're making a covenant on the sealed document of the names of the princes, of the Levites, and of our priests. So now, it's remember, there's no chapter division. So chapter 38 should have been verse 1 if I were to be the one doing this. You know, I don't put chapter. So chapter 9 verse 38, they're making a covenant. Chapter 10 is pretty much the covenant. Okay, so from verses 1 to 26 of chapter 10, notice how like 26 verses are lumped in really tight, like they're very together. It's all the names. We're not going to read it because whoever reads it's going to embarrass themselves, and we want. Right, but it's a list of those who signed the covenant, and then from verse 27 to 29 is the terms of the covenant. Okay, and then from verse 30 to 39 is pretty much the details of what's going to happen in the covenant, or the area of decisions that they're going to make. So when you make a covenant, it's always we repented. There was a sense of a revival. Like every revival will always have a declaration. Right? We experienced something of God, and we don't want to live the way we were living before, so we're going to put it in writing. That's a covenant. Okay? So the first area of decision was in verse 30. We will not, chapter 10, we will not give our daughters to the people of the land or take their daughters for our sons. So they said we're going to be faithful to God in the area of our romance, in the area of marriage. Okay? What was the common thing of Israel, especially through the book of Ezra we talked about? They were always marrying the enemy, right? Interreligious marriage, okay? It was the first thing that always happened whenever it came to idolatry. The nation of Israel would be healthy, and all of a sudden, slowly, who's that? right? What's her name? And then as time goes by, there's interreligious marriage, and then they slowly forget God. Okay, so it never went to full idolatry in Ezra and Nehemiah, but it always went to interreligious marriage. And they said, we're not going to do that. Okay, that's one of the things of the covenant. Also, verse 31, it's what does it say? And the peoples of the land bring in goods of the grain on the Sabbath day to sell. We will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on the holy day. Okay, so the second decision that they said in the covenant is that we're gonna be honest in our businesses. Okay, we're gonna not work. We're not gonna work on the Shabbat, on the Saturday. We're gonna be just like Chick-fil-A. Okay, open 6 days, and we're gonna be very firm, right? Just like Chick-fil-A. We're not gonna work. Okay, and then the third, from verse 32 to 39. We don't have to read all of that, but it's in the area of integrity. Okay, that we will be faithful to God in our work, but we will do it with integrity. Okay, so remember, whenever a covenant happened, whenever a revival happened, a covenant followed after. Okay, so making covenants or renewal covenants to God is a thing in the Old Testament. We see this in Genesis 35, where with Jacob, how he made a renewed covenant with God. Practically speaking, we see this today in marriage, when people are married for, say, 20 years, and say it was rocky. But then they both got healed, but they both repented. They both died of their pride in 20 years. They make a renewal, right? They renew their vows. So it's the same covenant, but they're just renewing it, you see? And a renewal is always, the implication is, we don't want to live the way we were living before. We were living in a way we didn't like, we encountered God, and now we want to make a declaration we don't want to live like that, so we're making a covenant. Okay, a renewed people. So remember, the very essence of Ezra and Nehemiah, because when we think of Ezra and Nehemiah, we think of, Ezra built the temple, and then Nehemiah built the walls. That's true, but the heart behind all that is a renewed people. So you have a renewed temple, you have renewed walls, but the essence of it is a renewed people. And that's what's happening. So the heart of Ezra and Nehemiah is this right here. Chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, chapter 12. A renewed people. Okay? Now, we don't have time to read 11 and 12. Again, it's a lot of names, and but names that we can't pronounce.
I think I could do it, actually. But I know that there's just not time for it, but I think I can do it.
Okay. Could you do it without stuttering?
Yeah.
Okay. No, because I think we could all do it, but we'd be like...
No, because I was looking through it, I was like, wait, I think I can do that. I'm not going to be that slow.
Maya.
Do it fast and just mumble.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you do it without mumbling, right? Or without stuttering?
No, I would, like, when I just look at it, I can sound it out in my head, and it's like easy. It's not hard. You just have to be aware of it, and how a lot of the names are similar. So it's like Hekeliah, Zedekiah, Seraiah, Ezariah, Jeremiah, Peshur, Amariah, Malchijah. Like, it's just, I don't know. I feel like if you just, it's not, if you just get used to it, it's like learning the language, like
I'm okay with like, and then Bob said to Jim, and then Jim had 200 cattle, and then Sam had, like basically.
I'm so glad.
Tom.
That's what I noticed on TV. I've been watching just a little bit about the war and everything, and when they interview people, they all have these Jewish names that I'm like, wow, nobody, unless they're American, and then sometimes they have a regular first name, and then the second name and third name are like names out of the Bible.
My name, I learned when I went to Israel, is not pronounced Reuben. It's Reuben. It is a to it. I was like, whoa! And this guy, it was at the airport where they stopped me because like whatever, but like he says, oh no, your name's pronounced Brooklyn. And he said it. I was like, whoa! I didn't know that. But anyways, yeah. I guarantee you, if you had one of those, like an Orthodox Jew reading this, we would be like, oh, I didn't know it's pronounced like that. Right?
Yeah, that's probably true.
Right? Like it's like Tobiah, and it's like, no, it's like Chabaya. Right? Now, chapter 11 and 12 is pretty much the result of revival. Okay, so chapter 9 is the revival, chapter 10 is the covenant that they made, and then chapter 11 and 12, it's the results of it. Okay, now, just summing up the two chapters, 3 results that occur after the revival and the covenant. The first is the filling Jerusalem with God's people. That's what's going to happen. We're going to see. So now it's kind of going to transition from a religious element to kind of politics, in the sense of how can we repopulate Israel. That's the first thing that happens. How can we? So look at the verse, 2 verses in chapter 11. Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring out 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 out of the 10 remained in the other towns. Verse 2, and the people blessed all the men who willingly offered to live in Jerusalem. You see what's happening here? So what's happening here is that they're trying to fill the city again. So what happened was that, remember, for the 70 years under the captivity because of Nebuchadnezzar, he ransacked the place. He destroyed the place. He lit it on fire. Okay, so for 70 years, Jerusalem, the Jerusalem that people fight over day and night, was a ghost town for those 70 years. Okay, because they're all in Babylon. So it was a ghost town. And then after Zerubbabel came, and then Ezra came, they started to repopulate the city. It wasn't big, but again, they started to
So it'd be like going to Gaza, like it'd be all like bombed out, like.
I was going to say Detroit. And the reason why I say Detroit is because when you go to Detroit, it's literally like I'm not trying to disrespect Detroit, but it's like a bomb blew off and no one did anything about it. Meaning, like in '67 there was the Detroit riots, and then all the looting and burning and all that stuff happened. But there's a lot of things that they never did with it. So you go 50 years later, and these rebels are still there. So it just looks really, really burned down, right? So the same thing with Jerusalem. It was destroyed, and it was a ghost town. So then even when they came back, these Jews from Zerubbabel, from Ezra, they didn't live in Jerusalem. They lived outside of it. So they were in the villages, they were in the surrounding towns, because it wasn't the debris, right? It wasn't good quality. Okay, so this is why here, notice in verse 1 and 2, we're going to choose 1 out of 10 people, 1 out of 10 families to live in Jerusalem. So for sure, the leaders lived there. All the leaders of Jerusalem or of the Israelites, they lived inside Jerusalem, but now they need to repopulate it, right? So they need to repopulate the city, because again, you could have walls, right, surrounding a city, but if there's no people living in it, what's the point of it, right? So now it's more political in the sense of how can we make this city beautiful? How can we make this place populated again? Because again, we just built the walls, but if no one's living in the walls, there's no point. Remember, the point is not the walls, the point is in the temple, the point is the people, the renewed people. We need renewed people living inside Jerusalem. And that's what's happening here in chapter 11. Okay, so from chapter 11, verses 1 to chapter 12, verse 26, it's all about filling Jerusalem, and it gives a long list of people. Remember, they choose one. It's like casting lots. Okay, like a program as far as all right, who's gonna out of 10 families, we need 1 of them to come in here, right? You get this, but not everyone wanted to live there. Remember that. It wasn't like people are fighting to live in Jerusalem. It was like we're going to cast lots because we need people to live here. Okay, and not only that, the reason why Nehemiah wanted people living inside Jerusalem was to make the nation strong. Right, you need people to make a nation strong. So it's you need an like again. Imagine you just have walls and no one's in it, and some other nation comes in. They're just going to destroy the walls, right? But you need people to make it strong. And we know from history, we'll go into this in a bit, but we know from history, guess what happened? From the book of Nehemiah till 400 years later, we had a guy by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember, Alexander the Great, he's dead at 32. There's four of the generals that fought for 22 years to take over. And the Seleucid Empire, there's a guy by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes that utterly disrespected this temple right here. And who stepped up? The Jews. But you can't have people stepping up unless they live there. And this is where Judas and Maccabeus and the Maccabean revolt happened. And then they defended the temple. Right? But that can't happen without this chapter right here. We need people to live here. Okay? Okay, so that's the first result that happened after the revival. So remember, chapter 11:1 to chapter 12, verse 26 is a list of names, but it's the filling of the temple, okay? Now, the second result of the revival was a dedication to the temple. Okay, this is in chapter 12 now. Let's go to chapter 12, verse 27 to 43, was a dedication to the temple. Okay, so they gathered the Levites for dedication ceremony. There were ceremonies of purification from verse 31 to 43. There are two choirs that sung with joyful voices. There's two choirs singing back and forth. So that's the second thing that happened, is dedication to the temple. And then chapter 3, let me read chapter 12, verse 43. It's a beautiful verse. Oh my, we're going fast. 43 of chapter 12, it says, "And they offered great sacrifices that day, and rejoiced. For God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women, the children, all rejoiced. And the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away." Beautiful. Okay? And I'll go there in a bit. But the third thing that happened was institutionalizing the temple services. And this is from chapter 12, verse 44 to 47. That's the end of it. Okay? So, and the theme of joy and what they did in institutionalizing the temple service was consistent. Okay, but look back at that verse. Okay, God made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children all rejoiced. And the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. Listen to that. The joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. That's why I sent you guys that clip. Okay? That's why I sent you guys that clip. That was the one that I sent that to you last year. Okay. The one where those Jews were were dancing around and all that. Yeah, I sent them that. Just, but it's funny because this is Nehemiah, right? Remember the famous verse in chapter 8, verse 10, "The joy of the Lord is my strength," right? That's the same book. But compare this noise, okay? The joy of Jerusalem was heard far away, to Ezra 3:13. Remember in Ezra 3:13 when they dedicated the temple and there was supposed to be this fire that came, there was no fire? Remember, the young people were screaming for joy, and the old people were what? Grumbling. They're like, "What is this?" Right? There was mourning going on. So if you ever go to a sporting event and there's always cheering and there's some people booing, it's a weird noise, right? But that was what was happening before, and then now in Nehemiah we have pure joy. Okay? Really quick, proper order, proper happiness. Okay? Proper order, proper happiness, meaning Augustine is a church father, said, "How come my generation so unhappy?" Kind of like our generation, like young people, our young people, meaning like just a lot of unhappy young people. They have everything, gadgets, this, but just everyone's. Augustine is a church father, 3rd century, so this is like, 1,700 years ago? Said the same thing, with everyone's so unhappy. You know what he said? "My generation is so unhappy because people have disordered hearts." Disordered hearts, meaning that within inside of them, it's internal. They have things that they love, they're out of order, meaning that God, who should be loved above everyone, is probably number 3. And some wealth is number 1. And as a result, it's destroying people's souls. Disordered love. Okay? But to be happy, we went through the book of Proverbs last year. We learned that happiness is a fulfilled heart. We all have desires, but when these desires are fulfilled, there's a sense of medicine, Proverbs says, right? Hope deferred makes the heart sick, Proverbs 13:12 says. So when you have your heart in proper order, meaning you love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? Your heart is ordered. As a result, there's a sense of happiness. There's a sense of joy, fulfillment within inside someone, right? But look what the Jews experienced here in chapters 8, 9, and 10. There was ordered hearts, right? And if you have ordered hearts individually, imagine being around people who have ordered hearts corporately. It's a place of joy. It's a place of people are fulfilled. Back to the video I sent you guys, right? But those kids seem pretty happy, right? They seem pretty happy, right? So if you have disordered hearts, you have unhappy people, okay? And we can sum up this generation with that too. Now, Dennis Prager, he's a Jew. He did a lecture. He wrote a book on happiness, and he says, I'm paraphrasing him. He says, "This world, and it's true. This world is better with happy people." It is, right? Isn't a city much better when everyone's happy, right? Isn't a nation better with happy? The world is better with happy people. Absolutely. It's true, and there are certain religions, there are certain cultures that happiness cannot be attached to it. Okay, it's true. Now this is him, and I'm agreeing with him, so I'm saying it, but I'm using him just in case you disagree. I'll say Dennis Prager said it, but he says if you look at Muslims, they're not happy people. If you look at Muslims, you look at the Muslim religion, everyone's just very flat, just their faces. There's no joy in their eyes. Like if you look at even Judaism, there's a sense of happiness. Christianity, there's a rejoicing. If you hear Islam, like the music, Allah, Allah, like just it's not the most happiest vibe. And when you see them, even in America, right? So again, it's not to knock anyone, but again, it's not just Islam. There's other cultures too where it's like their culture plus happiness don't go together. Okay, but if anything, it's those who have a belief in God, a belief in Christ, those who have ordered hearts, that should be fulfilled people, right? So again, the world is better when people are fulfilled. The world is better when people are happy. Okay?
I mean, I think what he said, I don't know, like, happiness is not in the Bible, but I think God directs his people to go into his temple with thanksgiving and praise, So it's like, yeah, happiness, I think happy is like a buzzword in our culture. Yeah. But it's like thanksgiving and praise, it's like when people, like the other day I was having like a bad day or whatever, and I think there was a woman, I forgot where I was, if I was at work or off of work, wherever I was, but her shirt said like grace and gratitude, and it was like an older lady,
wow.
And it just put me in check, and it was just like grace and gratitude, and I was just thinking about like, just being thankful. It's like they say that people with gratitude live longer,
Oh, it's healthy.
Yeah.
It's healthy. Like, self-entitlement kills.
Yeah.
I mean, I should be this. I should have this. How come I'm this age and this hasn't happened to me? Right? Self-entitlement. That it's a number one killer to the soul. Right? I can most likely, if someone's constantly depressed, if constantly anxious, constantly angry, there's always a self-entitlement issue. Guarantee you. But the person's unaware of it. Right? So I'm just saying, and biblically, what's self-entitlement? That's pride. Okay? So now, chapter 13, okay, now, this is a very interesting chapter, okay, now, if you didn't know, this is the very end of the Old Testament. This is the real end of the Old Testament. And the reason why it's the end of the Old, because what's the last book we think of the Old Testament, the last part is what? We think?
Job.
Malachi. Right, because positionally it's at the end of our Old Testament, but Malachi fits in between chapters 12 and chapters 13. Okay, so remember, the reason why there's major prophets and minor prophets is because within the narratives, God was sending them to warn the nation of Israel. So in the book of Ezra, we have Haggai and we have Zechariah that God sent. Right, it even says it, I think it's in chapter 4. But in the book of Nehemiah, he sends Malachi. Now, what happened is this. In between chapters 12 and chapters 13, remember this. Nehemiah, what was his occupation before? He was a cupbearer to Artaxerxes. Remember, Artaxerxes saw him sad. He's like, what's wrong? And remember, he says, how long will you be there in chapter 1 and chapter 2? How long will you be there? So it wasn't a permanent position that he had. So Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls, and he did it in 12 years. He did it in 52 days, but again, the process, dealing with the people, the politics, Sanballat, Tobiah, all the enemies of the. We're out. Let's get off now, and then we'll get back on. Okay.
What year was this, Reuben? Was this like 500 BC?
No, it was. This was 433.
Okay.
433 until 423. So it was 10. There was
And the temple fell what year the first time?
586.
Okay.
So before that.
Yeah.
So what happens here? So from 433 to 423, Nehemiah. What happened? Okay, is that for 10 years, he went back to Susa. Okay, so after chapter 12, Nehemiah goes back to Susa for 10 years. Okay, and in the 10 years, the stiff-necked, stubbornness of humanity comes back into the nation of Israel. Okay,
Just in that 10 years.
Just
after the dedication.
Just after 10 years. So, if you read Malachi, or if you're Italian, Malachi, right? It's like a blueprint of chapter 13. So technically speaking, chapter 13 of Nehemiah is the very end of the Old Testament, the very end. And then there's 400 years, and then we have Jesus.
Do they have Bibles that stick it in, like that do that?
I thought of it.
I was just going to ask that. If
That'd
they
be
have,
so helpful.
if they have written a Bible that's in chronological.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, but the reason why is because like this. Look at our Bibles. It's put out in sections. It's narrative. So look at Esther. They should have put Esther before, by the way. And then after that, so it's narrative, and then there's poetry. That's Job. And then there's the prophets. That's the major and the minor prophets. But the major and minor prophets are amalgamated with the narrative. But again, we think of it, Malachi's the end because Matthew's right there, right? We think that, right?
Yeah.
But realistically speaking, Malachi was a prophet sent in between the 10 years that Nehemiah was in Susa with the king. Remember, it was only temporal. And then when he comes back in chapter 13, it's not good news. Okay?
Whoa.
So,
where's Isaiah stuck in? Just quick question.
Isaiah was way before. He was during like the Kings, first and Kings.
Around David.
Yeah, so Isaiah was 200 years before Daniel. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was during the 490 years of rebellion. Yeah.
So Nehemiah goes to Susa for 10 years. Did he meet Esther? And
No.
okay.
No. Esther. This is Artaxerxes the king.
Okay.
He's the son of Xerxes, who was the king before that. So she was probably long gone.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but that's a good point because they were both in Susa, right? And it was during the Persian reign. So now, can someone read verse 1 to 3 of chapter 13?
On that day they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, for they did not meet the people of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. As soon as the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent.
Okay.
Whoa.
So what's happening here is new legalisms. Okay, so there's going to be a downfall right here, and we're gonna climb back and discuss a little about that. But what's happening here is that there's a prohibition against marrying the Moabites or the Ammonites, and you see how it says on that day they read from the book of Moses in hearing of the people, okay, and it says and it was found written, okay, that's from Deuteronomy 23 verse 3 and 4 that they were reading. And that Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 3 and 4 pretty much says you cannot be with the Moabites or the Ammonites for 10 generations. Just for 10 generations. And it's a form of new legalisms this is pretty much a new legalism that was formed. in the Israelites. And the reason why is because the original law says you cannot marry them for just 10 generations. It was because of the whole where it says he says in verse 2, for they did not meet the people of Israel with bread and water, but hire but Balaam. See that? So this is from Numbers. Remember, Balaam was a prophet. He was one of the Israelites, and Balak, who was the king of the Moab, asked him to curse his own people, right? And he consented to that, and God kind of used his cursing as a blessing, right? Remember the whole talking donkey and all that. So, in essence, remember, this is past 10 generations, but they're still following it. So there's like a self-righteousness that's ready in the nation of Israel here. Remember, it wasn't a command, do not marry the Moabites permanently, right? It was just for 10 generations. But they added on to it and they said, never marry a Moabite. Okay, that's the legalism. Remember, who's a prominent Moabite that we know? Ruth, right?
Oh, really?
And Ruth was the great-grandmother of who? King David. So God did not condemn it. There's a book specifically for Ruth. Okay, remember Ruth married Boaz. Their son was Obed. Obed had Jesse. Jesse had David. So David's great-grandmother was a Moabite. Okay, so again, it's not don't marry the Moabites. It's just they took it a step further. It's a new legalism that happened. It happens with all of us.
That's crazy.
Okay, so
Ruth was like 500 years or more before this, right?
Oh yeah. They surpassed 10 generations for sure. But again, it's just legalism, and Jews do it with all due respect. Orthodox Jews do it to today. Christians do it to today, where there's something that it's in the Bible will go a step further. For example, in the 60s and 70s, there was the famous book by Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, that was red, right? And then if you were at a university college campus and you would carry this red book around, the Communist Manifesto, it was a sign of sophistication, right? Intelligence, right? You walked around and it's like, I'm smart if you had that. So Christians responded and they said, I'm going to carry my black Bible around. And then it went, I'm going to carry my big black Bible. So that's how it started. When you see Christians in the 60s and 70s, they had big black Bibles, and the implication was, you were sophisticated if you have that. Well, I'm more righteous, right? The more righteous, the
Really?
Yeah. So I'm just saying, but it's where is that in the Bible? It's not. But it's a new legalism that happens within the human heart. We all do that. All of us do that. Okay? In the sense, the new legalism, the very heart of it is self-righteousness. Right? Self-righteous always finds some new way to be superior upon someone else. Someone there?
Aaron?
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of a new legalism is kind of like eating, where it's like, oh, I'm drinking, or I'm like eating. Oh yeah, someone is. Yeah, it's like. But it's like maybe eating, like you're eating. Never mind. I don't want to go on that subject.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Can I just chair?
Oh,
Yeah, I'll go get it.
no, it's okay. Here, I can sit right there.
You want a chair, Aaron?
Oh, I can sit. No.
I can go.
Yeah, just get a. Yeah. So, anyways, but legalism really creeps in, right? Just like the big black Bible. Okay, so.
That's funny. I didn't never do that. Like.
Yeah. We have 10 minutes. Okay, so verse 4 onward is Nehemiah's reforms. Okay, so can someone read 4 to 9? 4 to 9. Chapter 13, 4 to 9.
You have some names in there, so whoever reads it.
All right.
I'll give it a whirl.
What's that?
I'll give it a whirl. Or you gonna read it? Yeah.
You know what? We should have one of these audio Bibles set. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you want to lip sync it, let's like.
Here, let me do it. I have it.
This is like a form of entertainment. Like, whoever's gonna be like,
Here, I'll do it.
Is it 4 through
4 to 9, just 5 verses.
Should I give or should I read it?
Oh no, I was gonna do the audio by.
Oh,
Let's
okay.
go for it. Go for it. Go for it.
Alright.
One, two, three. Somebody says.
No, I'm doing it. It's got a,
We're just waiting.
and then it's, I clicked the audio file. Where is it taking this? Oh, there.
Chapter 13. On that day they read in the book of Moses and the
Oh wait,
audience
that's,
of the
I
people,
didn't skip
It
it.
doesn't
and
skip.
therein was found written
Isn't it all done?
that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of
Should we,
God
should we
forever.
read it?
Yeah, you guys are in it.
I'll read it, okay. Now before this, Eliashib the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, was allied with Tobiah, and he had prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priests. But during all this I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Then after certain days I obtained leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. Then I commanded them to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. That's it.
This is heartbreaking. This is very heartbreaking. Nehemiah leaves for 10 years. He comes back, and guess who has a new office in the temple? Tobiah. Remember Tobiah?
Yeah.
Tobiah was one of the three villains that we talked about in the previous chapters. Remember, there was Tobiah, there was Sanballat. So this enemy who does not like the Jews has his own office, right? Where the vessels were supposed
in the temple.
Yeah, and so
in like the holy, in like
he's an enemy. So Tobiah is we study. He's mentioned throughout the whole book of Nehemiah,
was
but
he
the whole.
Moabite or was he? Do we not know?
Oh, it's chapter.
Tobiah was trying to rat him out to the king and saying
Yeah.
that he's trying to set
He was an
Nehemiah
Ammonite.
himself up to be the overtaker of the king.
Oh, they were
Whoa.
slandering left and right. They were
Similar
lying.
to what happened with Esther. What was that? Who was Haman? Wasn't Haman trying to like do?
Very similar. It's the same. We talked about different times, same demons.
Same stuff going
Same
on.
demons. And
Whoa.
2023, same thing.
Wow.
Different times, just same demons. Yeah. So Tobiah, the enemy. He has
That's
the office,
crazy.
and he's very angry. Okay. Now, what happens is that there's temple reform. Verse 10 to 14, there's financial reforms. Verse 15 to 22, there's priority reform, and verse 23 to 31, there's relational reforms. Okay, so everything, I'll sum up to you. Look at verse 15, say to 18. It's as if it's like all the covenants. Remember the covenant they made in chapter 10. They broke all of them. They literally broke all of them. What was the covenant in chapter 10 verse 31 was in reference to the Sabbath. Remember? So they started to break. Remember, they said in the covenant in chapter 10 verse 31, we're not going to break the Sabbath. They broke the Sabbath. They started working on the Sabbath, and it was like there was the walls. There were merchants that came there and they just waited there, and then the Jews got so tempted and they started working on the Shabbat, right? And that, remember the covenant before, we're not going to, well, they broke it. Okay, look at in verses 23 to 27, 23 to 27, they started marrying non-believers again. Okay, verse 23, in those days also I saw the Jews who married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah. but only the language of the other people. Look what he did, verse 25. And I confronted them and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. Okay, so this is Nehemiah. This is Nehemiah. But notice this though. It was the covenant that they made. Remember the covenant that they made? They broke it again. 10 years. I think it was Ronald Reagan that he had a famous quote. It's like, we're always one generation away from extinction. Right? It's true. Like, we are responsible for our generation. Right? And then your obligation is to pass whatever the values you have to the next generation. And their responsibilities for the next generation. And that next generation is not yours, but your responsibility is the next one. And again, we're always one generation away from extinction. Look at this, 10 years, 1 decade. And it's like they forgot everything. Right? We talked about the stiff-necked nature of humanity. Okay, so you go back to Malachi. What's Malachi all about? He's calling, remember the famous passage that we always talk about, God hates divorce. Remember that?
Yeah.
That's in the context of Nehemiah chapter 13, right? So remember, does God hate all divorces? No. He hates a divorce where a believer says, I want to divorce this woman so I can be with a non-believing woman so I can live their life. You see that? So again, it's a reiteration of Nehemiah chapter 13 here. Okay? It's the rise of profit over purity here. The rise of profit over purity. Okay? By the way, remember it says, and half of them spoke the language of the Ashdod, and they did not speak the language of Judah. Remember, this is not against interracial marriage. The Bible's for interracial marriage, but it's against interreligious marriage. Okay, the reason why it might seem like racial, for example, well, put 2 and 2 together. The language that they spoke at the time was Hebrew, and if you don't know Hebrew, you can't read the Torah, right? So there's nothing wrong with speaking in a foreign language. It's just you got to make sure you understand the Torah. That's the heart of it. Okay, so we mentioned that Moses was married to an African, right? We mentioned that Ruth, who was a Moabite. We mentioned that Joseph was married to an Egyptian. We mentioned, right? So there's many interracial marriages. It's not that God wasn't upset about that. It was always a religious one, right? And what does he say in verse 25 onward? But I confronted them, pulled their hair out, and I made them an oath to God, saying, you shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters, your sons, for yourself. Did not, and here comes Solomon, did not King Solomon sin on account of such women among many nations? There was no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all of Israel. Nevertheless, 4 women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all the great evil, act treacherously against our God for marrying foreign women? So again, it's not the foreign women, it's the fact that this is from 1 Kings 11, they drew his heart away from God. And that's always the case, being unequally yoked.
My translation says pagan women too.
Pagan women. Okay, so it's not, again, anyways, this is the rise of profit over purity. But again, really quick, vertical sin will always lead to horizontal sin. And the chapter 13 of Nehemiah is all horizontal sin, right? Marrying foreign women, the corruption of priests, disloyalty towards the Shabbat, right? But remember, it's always a result of a distorted view vertically. Okay, if your heart before God is distorted, your heart before people will be. Okay, so horizontal sins, murder, rape, all the things we see today are a result of a broken relationship with God. So when we look at our nation, when we see the Middle East, when we see all the horror going on, that is a ramification of people's hearts, how they are disconnected from God. Okay? They are disconnected to God. What's the very heart of the Torah? The Shema, right? Deuteronomy 6:4. Shema Yisrael Adonai. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This is the equivalent of our Matthew chapter 22, verse 37. Love the Lord your God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you love God, you'll naturally love people, right? If you don't love God, you'll end up hating people. And that's what we see today. Okay? So the reason why the Jews are acting like this, there's horizontal sin, is because of vertical sin. The reason why we see horizontal sin, we see looting, we see mass theft, we see rape, etc., is because of a distorted relationship with God. Okay? Now, the sad part about this book, or this last chapter, is it shows the reality of revival, but also the brokenness of humanity. Okay? If I were to make a film, okay, I'm a producer, I'm a director, I would end my film about Nehemiah in chapter 12, verse 47. Right? I think all of us would too. We would end there, the very last verse of chapter 12. But then you see chapter 13, you're like, wait, what? Why'd you add that? Right? You're ruining the story. Because the Bible is a realist book. Okay? Meaning that it tells you how life is. It tells you the human nature. We have a tendency to fight between pessimism and optimism. Pessimism, you're so negative, Nancy, right? Or optimism, very positive, Joel Osteen. Right? There's a fire, there's a building burning behind me. Man, this is sky's blue, right? Right? The Bible is neither. The Bible is a realist book. Okay? It's going to tell you as it is, just like the book of Ecclesiastes, right? Blessings and cursings fall on everybody. We don't like to hear that. We want to hear the good person receive blessings, the bad person receive justice. That's not life. It's not how it should be. Okay? Remember this. Again, if I were to have a film, I would end in chapter 12, verse 47. But again, look at the way it ends. This is the way the Old Testament ends right here. Right? Just on this...
Just on that cliff.
Yeah, an anticlimactic book. But the Bible, in a sense, especially the Old Testament, is anticlimactic. Think of Noah, right? It's, oh wow, a new beginning. And then chapter 6 to 9, and all of a sudden, Tower of Babel. Right? It's always, right? You have Moses, who led them for 40 years, and what? He never entered the promised land. He never entered the promised land, right? It's good, and then it stops. Then you have the book of Judges, right? It's like one leader after another, and then the way the book of Judges ends is they rape this woman, they cut her up, their body into 12 pieces, and they send each piece to one tribe. That's the way it ends. It's like, what? Right? And then you have the revivals in the New Testament, right? Acts chapter 2, Peter speaking, thousands of people coming to Christ. And then chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira, right? It's like lying, it's like always good, and that it's a realistic view of humanity. Okay? This whole, and they lived happily ever after, it's only in the book of Revelation. That's about it. But in the Bible, as far as right now, until Christ comes, there is no happily ever after. There is none, because of human nature. Okay, Kevin?
I was going to say, piggybacking off of that, like in Nehemiah 13, towards the end, where he's saying it ends in a bad note where they desecrate the temple, and then they make the covenant with God. It's like God is just showing us that it's like his way of like ushering in the Messiah and Jesus. Like he's the only one that can, bridge that relationship with God and make the real covenant. And but it's like it just shows us time and time again. We try to like put lipstick on a pig.
Yep,
it's like
clean it up. Well, it's gonna go right back to it's dirt, right?
Yeah.
And that's humanity. That is humanity. Broken people. All of us are broken people, right? That's why self-righteousness is Christ flipped tables over that stuff.
Yeah.
Like we're not pure in heart. We're not, right? This is why when Christianity, like for me, I need Christianity, right? I need it because the condition of the human heart. But when people project Christianity to be like, oh, there's the good and there's the bad, and the good people are the Christians, the bad people are non-Christians.
Let's Safe Mama's in Flint, Michigan.
Sorry?
Let's Safe Mama.
What's that?
I think she's not talking to us.
Huh?
She's talking to someone else.
Hold on a minute.
Look at verse 25 really quickly. And I confronted them and cursed them and beat them and pulled out their hair. It's very, this is the prophet of God here, right? Is Nehemiah justified?
Did he go too far?
I think, okay, remember, this is, and there's no narrative that says, and the Lord approved him. Like, there's none of that. It's, I think there's a place for anger in a broken world. I think Nehemiah, like being gone for 10 years. Remember, from the very beginning of his ministry, remember where the king, he saw his face and he saw him sad. He had a heart for the people, right? And I think there's a place for anger in a broken world, meaning that his anger was genuine, but I think he did take it too far, meaning that, I think assaulting, like he'd be in a lawsuit today. Oh my, like, if by...
In my notes underneath, it said that it was very much, his actions were very much like when Christ took a whip and drove the moneymakers out.
I see a whip, but when you hit people,
That's different than pulling out your hair.
yeah, like and like even Ezra. Remember in Ezra, he forced people to divorce. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Right? But it's similar, right? Like he was mad at the exact same thing. Like you're marrying these women again, right? But again, I just want to say, if you have a heart for God, I think there should. Remember, anger is not bad as long as it doesn't go out of proportion. Remember, Paul says in Ephesians where he says, do not let the sun go down in your anger. Be angry, but do not sin. So there's a means of anger, but again, there's that fine line when it does become sin. And again, I wouldn't use Nehemiah as like, yeah, be like Nehemiah and, assault people, right? But again, I want everyone to know this, is that I think all of us in this room, if you have a heart for God, there should be a little anger in your heart. And that little anger is because the way the world is right now. Like I think when you do look at your phone, I think there should be a sense of like, yeah, this is demonic. This is evil. So the person like Joel Osteen has no seat at the table because again, he can't really, he doesn't present himself that way. That type of Christianity doesn't allow you to be frustrated or, because we're human, right? Like you're supposed to like hear that, hey, 40 babies got their heads cut off. Yeah, be happy. No, I want you to be angry at that, right? But that anger should spur you on to action in a good way. And that's the fine line, okay? Now, we're past time, but if anything, with Nehemiah, two things that after this, remember, this is the end of the Old Testament right here. So Nehemiah 13 is the end of the Old Testament. So remember, Malachi is in between chapter 12 and 13, and then this is it. And it ends on, it's anticlimactic, it's a downer. But it shows us the need of a perfect leader. We need a perfect leader, right? And there's a perfect leader that came on the scene 400 years later.
Jesus, yeah.
Christ, right? The one person that everyone was looking for, okay, was Christ. Real change happens if there's internal change, and that's what Christ did. He wasn't all, yes, he was about the law, but he wanted to talk about the heart of the law, which is the heart of the person, right? What's the essence of murder? You're violating someone that's an image bearer of God. That's the heart of it. And that's what Christ always pointed to. Always gone to the human heart, right? If you notice, you never know, Christ was never hard on people that were like pleasure seekers, like the people at the club, the people like sleeping around, the people that are always drunk. He was never, because he always saw past them, like, man, these are hurting people. And they are using this as escapism. They're using this as a means to cover up. But he had always talked to their heart, and they were like, wow, how do you know that? Right? And the Pharisees could never do that. Anyone from the Old Testament could never do that. And it's something beautiful that Christ did, was that he would direct us to the human heart, right? And remember, this is the essence. If you believe in Christ, what's transformed? Your heart. It should be. It should be. Okay? And last, there's a need for revival. Okay? Meaning this. Tim Keller once said that we can never start revival, but we can always stop it. Meaning that God is always trying to do something in his people. Look at the Old Testament. God's trying to do something. Who's the one that stopped it? It's always the stiff-necked, hard-hearted person, right? We're always in our own way. We're always in God's way, okay? The need for revival. The reason why I say that is because look at Nehemiah, look at Ezra. This book is not about a renewed temple or renewed walls, even though it is, but the heart behind that is a renewed people. What's the essence of the temple? Is that you have a meeting place with God. What's the essence of the walls? To protect you from bad people, right? Religious liberty. The Bible is pro-religious liberty, but it's for the people, to renew people. In chapter 9, chapter 10, we see that. There was a covenant made, and there's renewed people, okay? But think of it, be sympathetic with the Israelites here. 70 years, gone, coming back to rubble, right? It looks like Detroit, right? It's discouraging. And people need renewal. We need internal renewal. The Israelites, they needed internal renewal. You know what? We need this today. Look at the people in America. People are discouraged. People are downcast, right? The church is divided, almost every major denomination splitting because of wokeism, LGBTQ, critical race theory, whatever. But people are divided, right? And if anything, what we need here in the United States is renewal. We need renewed hearts, right? It's very frustrating, right? Being in especially in this time. But again, there's always hope if God's involved in it. And he always wants to work in his people, but will we allow him to? Okay? And then this is where the book of Nehemiah ends. Okay?
Oh, that's
You know, maybe you mentioned it, but why did Nehemiah leave?
Oh, because remember, the reason why he was a cupbearer,
Right.
okay? And it was a temporal job that he had from the king.
Oh, yeah, he
meaning
asked the
that-
king permission. to
Yeah,
go.
or the king said, how long will you be there? So it was 12 years. And after 12 years, he went back to Susa for 10 years. And then, I don't know why the mission happened after, but he went back to, and then he saw all this happening. And he was like, are you kidding me? And this is chapter 13. Okay? So, this concludes Nehemiah. And I will leave to Toronto, unfortunately, on Saturday. And we're going to start the book of Job. And I'll be online here, and then we'll take 2 weeks off, and we'll start the book of Job, and then that'll be it for the Old. So we've been going through the Old Testament for 5 years, and then we'll do Romans after.
wait, how many years? Wait, what?
5 years.
Are you
Lots
serious?
to cover.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, we've been going through
You
the
guys
Old
are experts now.
Wait, we've been doing it for 5 years.
Well, I take that back. I'll say 4. The reason why is because we did Revelation for 1 year. We took a year off,
Yeah.
but 4 years. All right,
long
4
year
years.
that
So
was.
We did from Genesis to almost Kings. First Kings, I remember I stopped there, and then we did minor prophets. We did all the minor prophets. We did Proverbs. We did Daniel. We did I forgot, but it's mainly the only thing we did in the New Testament was Revelation. That took a full year. That was COVID.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, that was. So we'll do Job, and then we'll go to the New Testament. Unless you guys want to, no, let's stick in the Old Testament.
New Testament.
Yeah. Okay. We'll do communion now. So we're gonna practice communion. This is if you in your heart believe that Christ is Lord, you're welcome to participate in communion with us. So you guys too online. Any questions though about Nehemiah and the Old Testament? No? I'm blown away when I study the Old Testament because I see how humanity is so repetitive. Just repetitive. Yeah. I was listening to, there's a guy by the name of Mike Berlinski. He's like this genius philosopher, and he's a secular Jew. And he was being interviewed by Ben Shapiro, who's an Orthodox Jew, and then he wrote a book called Human Nature. And he said philosophically, humans are 99.9% the same as far as the way we act, what drives us. Yeah, and you go back to the old, from Genesis 1 all the way to today, nothing. Everything's the same. All right, do you guys want to pass that around?